When things go wrong, people have a tendency to sit around and complain. They very seldom do anything to make it better. With violence, it's really no different. Now, they might hold a rally or a candlelight vigil. They might even have a concert to bring awareness to violence. But they really don't do anything that's going to reduce violence. They'll complain that the police don't do their job or the politicians don't do their job. But they really don't do anything to reduce violence. They'd like to see the politicians pass another law. Now, does anybody really think that one more law is going to keep bad people from doing bad things to other people? I don't think so. Thanks for tuning into our broadcast. We're going to spend the next several minutes talking about a variety of issues. We'll talk about some of the most common complaints or reasons people think that violence is so high in our society. We're going to talk about some of the FBI statistics on violence and see where the trends have been in the past several years. And then we will make some recommendations using third grade logic on things that may make our society a better place to live. It would be really comforting to think that the politicians could make us safer. It would be really comforting to think that somebody else could do things to clean up our society. It would be really comforting to think that if Hollywood would just take violence out of their forms of entertainment, that people would stop doing bad things. Or that if we could outlaw guns, people would stop doing bad things. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. As a matter of fact, people in my generation grew up with a lot of violence in their entertainment. We started as very young children with fairy tales that were filled with violence. We had children who were abandoned in the woods to starve. We had young women who were given poison apples. We had children that were threatened to be thrown into an oven, and fortunately they turned the tables on the Wicked Witch and put her in the oven instead. That's pretty violent stuff. TV and movies were filled with violence. We had shoot-'em-up westerns on TV. We had war movies at the theater. We had Bonnie and Clyde and Jesse James and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. All very violent people. They were actually glamorized in the movies. By the way, it's not a new phenomena that bad people have been glamorized in our society. If we go back to the 1800s, the dime store novels portrayed Jesse James as a noble outlaw. Well, he wasn't noble. He was a violent man. Jesse James, Bonnie and Clyde, Dillinger, all of these people killed numerous people. They were very violent, evil people. But our movies, our books, have always glamorized those people. Now, most of us that grew up with these things never thought about committing violent acts. So it isn't the books and movies that make people violent. As a matter of fact, I never really worried about the violence caused by these types of entertainment. I was much more worried that the rest of us would become insensitive to violence in our society because we were exposed to so much in our entertainment. Now, I don't know about you, but I am actually more incensed by violence today than I ever have been before. I am outraged by an animal who takes 3 young women off of the street, chains them into his home for 10 years, repeatedly torturing and raping them. When they would get pregnant, he would beat them until they miscarried. I am just absolutely incensed by that type of action. So I haven't been desensitized by it, and I would venture to guess that you haven't been either. How about the guns? There are 80 to 100 million Americans who own guns today. More guns than we've ever had in America before. But of those 80 to 100 million people, virtually none of us considered using our weapons for violent purposes. We are virtually all law-abiding citizens who have justifiable reasons for owning firearms. We use them for a variety of things. We'll go trap shooting, we'll go target shooting, shooting at tin cans. We'll go hunting with them. And yes, indeed, we'll use them for personal protection. But again, of the 100 million of us that own them, virtually none of us use them for violent purposes. Well, if we can't solve the problem by doing away with the guns and by taking violence out of the movies, we're just stuck with it, Steve. That's not my point. That's not what I'm saying. There are a lot of things we can do to reduce violence in our society, because we all know that violence is at an all-time high. We have violent crimes going on at rates that are just inconceivable. Or are they? Should we take a look at some of the facts? Let's take a look at the FBI statistics on crime in America. The FBI has statistics that are on their website up through 2010. So let's take a 35-year period of time from 1975 to 2010. Let's take a look at what has happened to crime in that 35-year period of time. 1975, there were a little over 200 million people in America. There were 20,000 murders. Nobody questions that that is way too many murders. There were 20,000. By 2010, our population had grown to over 300 million people. That's roughly a 50% population increase in 35 years. What happened to the murder rate in that same 35-year period of time? 50% increase in population. Did murders go to 40,000? 60,000. How about 100,000 murders? No. In 2010, in the United States of America, there were less than 15,000 murders. A reduction of about 6,000 murders in gross numbers, which is over a 25% reduction in number of murders. At the same time, the population went up by 50%. By the way, it's nearly a 50% reduction in murder rate. Now, you might say, but Steve, that's a distorted statistic, because people that would have died of their injuries in 1975 were saved because of advances in medical technology. That may be true. I'm sure it's at least true that some people lived in 2010 that would have died in 1975. So let's take a look at the violent crime rate from 1975 to 2010. That still went down by 20%. A 20% reduction in the violent crime rate in America. Well, why did we all know that violent crime is way up, if in fact it's down by 20% and murders are down by 50%? Well, I think the answer to that is actually pretty simple. In 1980, Ted Turner came up with a concept called CNN, Cable News Network. CNN brings us news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a great concept, by the way. I'm kind of a junkie of 24/7 news coverage. Today, there are several networks, Fox News, MSNBC, Headline News, and many others that we can go to 24 hours for news coverage. In 1975, if a violent crime happened in your neighborhood, you heard about it. In 2010, if a violent crime happens in America, you hear about it. They have so much trouble filling 24 hours a day of news coverage that they show us every low-speed chase on a freeway in Los Angeles. They bring to us every time Lindsay Lohan gets arrested yet again, every time a judge scolds her for violating the conditions of her bail. I really don't care about those things, but I do care about violence. Okay, Steve, so violence is down. There's nothing we need to do then. We should just accept the violence that's out there. Again, that's not what I'm saying. Any violence is too much, and we ought to strive to improve things. I am saying, however, congratulations, America. You have done a fantastic job of reducing violence. Let's attack the problem and reduce it even further. Sound good to you? Well, Steve, you've proven to us that violence is down in America. But, you know, it doesn't take away the fact that the school violence is at atrocious levels today. And you're right, they are at atrocious levels. However, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, violence in schools is down. Now, Sandy Hook Elementary School, a terrible tragedy, one that our heart goes out to all the families that were affected by that directly and, by the way, indirectly. How many of you think that Sandy Hook Elementary was the highest number of fatalities in a school attack in America? It wasn't. How about Virginia Tech, which, by the way, had more fatalities than Sandy Hook did? Not even close. How about Bath, Michigan? 45 dead, 58 injured. Why haven't we heard of that one? Well, it was in 1927. This is not a modern phenomenon. It is equally vile today as it was in 1927. My only point in bringing it up is 1927 shows that this is not a new problem that we're facing. By the way, what was the weapon of choice in Bath, Michigan? Dynamite. Okay, now what can we do to reduce violence in our community today? Well, first of all, I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility. I believe that the people who commit these heinous acts are responsible for their own acts. I would call on everyone in the media to stop making excuses for these people. There may be some value in analyzing what caused people to be bad people, but it's not going to affect that particular crime, and we should put the blame for those crimes on the people that deserve it. The people who deserve blame for the crime are not the victims, they're not society, they're not the economy. They're the evil monsters that perpetrated the crimes. Let's call them evil monsters. Let's call them vile. Let's call them cowards. Let's call them all the things that they actually are. 90+% of the time, these people attack absolutely defenseless people. Why? Because they are cowards. Let's call them that. Let's stop talking about what turns some seemingly normal kid that boxed and played soccer into a radical bomber. Well, they weren't a normal kid. They were an evil kid. They were monsters. Let's put the blame where it belongs. And it really doesn't matter if it was those that are glamorized in the movies of old or the actual villains of today. These people have the same types of traits. They're cowards, they're monsters, they're evil. You've got to love the uncle of the Boston bombers. He came out instantly and condemned their acts. He said they were a disgrace to their family, a disgrace to the country they came here from, and a disgrace to their religion. If somebody uses your religion to perpetrate violence on others, expose them for what they are. Don't try to defend them. Don't even try to defend your religion. Your religion doesn't need defending. But these people do need condemnation, and they need condemnation from you. I would also ask the media to stop showing their pictures on TV every 10 minutes. The only scenario where putting their picture on TV is a good idea is when they're trying to get the public's help in finding either who these people are or where these people are. Beyond that, let's take their picture off of the TV. I don't even want their names mentioned unless, again, it's helpful to finding them. Many of these people are actually looking for some perverse form of glory that they think they get by these kinds of actions. There should be no glory, even in their minds. Call them what they are. Stop giving them any of what they want. I wouldn't be reading or publishing their ridiculous manifestos that sometimes we hear from them. Okay, now I talked about personal responsibility, and I talked about what we as individuals can do. I don't mean to blame the media or our lawmakers. I certainly don't blame the police. They've got one of the hardest jobs out there, and I applaud them for their efforts to deal with violence. Unfortunately, when the police get involved in violent scenarios, it is generally after the violence has already happened. Their job is generally to solve the crime and apprehend the bad guys. They very seldom can prevent the violence. We've got to take responsibility for that. So what can we do? There are some very simple things that we can do. Some of them are much more long-term. We won't see effect of it next year. It may take us 20 years to see the effect of it. But one of them starts with your children. Teach your children that violence is not an acceptable form of expression. To coaches of teams, if you have a kid that throws an elbow in a sporting event, yank their fanny out of the game and slap them on the bench, even if they're your best player. If you're a parent, I would say the same thing. If you have to bench your kid for a game because the coach won't do it, do it. Teach them that violence is not appropriate. And I get it. I grew up playing football and hockey and basketball, which are all very violent sports. A lot of physical contact, a lot of bodies flying around. But that doesn't mean throwing a cheap shot at somebody is acceptable. On the playground, if they see somebody getting picked on, first of all, they shouldn't pick on anybody. And second, if they see somebody getting picked on, they should intervene. They should gather a group of kids that will gather around, and instead of cheering on a fight, tell the bully to back off. Defend the weaker student that's being picked on. If they have to, bring a teacher or a playground attendant or somebody into the situation to break it up. But tell your children not to cheer on violence, but to intervene on the side of nonviolence. We all teach our children not to go with strangers. Do your children know what a stranger is? Do they view it as that scary-looking person that they see from time to time? Or is it just somebody they don't know? TV networks have done tests on these this time and again, and it's scary. Children who have been taught not to talk to strangers have gotten into ice cream trucks with cameras on them, and parents have been shocked that their children have done this. Well, maybe we haven't done a good job of explaining to our children what a stranger is and what circumstances they shouldn't allow themselves to get into. Do they know that if a stranger grabs them and tries to take them anywhere, they should scream, kick, holler, run, do anything they can to avoid it? And what they should scream is no, no, is not no, 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 or I don't want to go with you. They should scream, this is not my mommy, or this is not my daddy, and they should keep screaming it as loudly and as long as they possibly can. A stranger is always apprehensive about stepping in when a parent is dragging their child out of the grocery store. But if it's not a parent, I think a lot of us would step up and intervene and help your child out. But teach your child these things. Teach your child that a gun is not something to play with. I actually never allowed my children to have play guns when they were kids because I wanted them to know that a gun was a tool that if used improperly was dangerous. So I never allowed them to have play guns. Oh, by the way, that doesn't mean they didn't use their finger, a stick, or something else to pretend it was a gun frequently. But it at least taught them that guns were guns. They saw guns their whole life. They were told only to touch them when I was there and with permission. If you own guns, by the way, keep them away from your children when you're not there. Have trigger locks, have gun safes. Keep them where children don't have access to them. If you don't have guns, it's equally important to teach your children that they don't touch a gun. Because I will guarantee you some of their friends have guns in their homes. They may even find a gun that got tossed from a crime in one of their parks. Make sure they know to get an adult if they find a gun and never to touch it without you. Teach your children that if they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, when they have a husband or a wife, that hitting is never allowed by them or their spouse. One hit and it should be over. That ends it. I am absolutely convinced there would be far less murders in domestic situations if with the first time somebody swung at somebody, the relationship ended, than by going on accepting excuses and apologies and flowers or diamonds or whatever it is. If it happens once, it's done. Because I can virtually guarantee you that if it happens once and it's not done, they will in fact do it again. I saw a preacher one time. His congregation was principally women. I'm assuming that they were single, although that's irrelevant. He said something that I thought was very profound. He said, judge a man not based on how he treats you when you give him what he wants, but how he treats you when you don't. By the way, that's equally appropriate for men and women, but his congregation was principally women, so that's why he used that particular reference. But I thought it was a brilliant thing to say and a very good way to evaluate your relationship with other people, whether it's a romantic relationship or just friends. Other things we can do to minimize violence and the risk of violence. In your own situation, always be aware of your surroundings. Never be so distracted that you don't know what's going on around you. If you're walking from a building to a car, have your keys in your hand already so you're not fumbling in a pocket or purse looking for them while some bad guy may be sneaking up on you. Be conscious of what's going on. Be conscious of what's going on in your neighborhood. You see a truck pull up to your neighbors and start loading up furniture and you didn't know the neighbor was moving and you don't see him there. I wouldn't be afraid to call the police and say it may not be anything. However, I do see that the Andersons have a truck loading furniture on and I didn't hear anything about it moving. You may want to send a car around to check on it. The saying since 9/11 has been, if you see something, say something. It's very true. I think the police will tell you they'd rather you had called and it be nothing than that you had ignored it and it had been a major crime. One of the things bad people do to justify some of their actions, whether it's just stealing your stuff or if it's whacking you over the head to get it, is they kind of dehumanize their victims. They don't think of them as another person. Well, I try to make everybody human in my life, whether I know them or not. I try to make eye contact and smile at strangers. I walk an average of a little over 10 miles a day. It's amazing how many people walking the other direction do everything they can to avoid eye contact. I try to look at every one of them, smile and say hi, say good morning, whatever is appropriate. If they're walking the same direction as me, sometimes I'll even tell one of my corny jokes, and some of them are polite enough to kind of act like they're laughing, but some actually go to all ends to avoid any acknowledgement that there's somebody else there. Well, it's part of the problem with so many of us out there, is people feel uncomfortable sometimes having an interaction with them. But I would say to you that if you treat everybody with respect, if you smile at everybody you come across, the two things are going to happen. I don't know about violence. I don't know if it'll reduce violence. But I will guarantee you this. If you smile and say hi to everybody in a friendly fashion, you will have a much better day. And I'm betting you'll brighten their day as well. I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast. I hope that you will go on Facebook and like us and share us with your friends. I hope you'll go on YouTube and like us and subscribe to us for our future videos. I hope if I see you out walking that you'll smile at me and say, "Hi, Steve." Until our next broadcast, I want you to remember, it's not rocket science, it's third grade logic.